This is an open letter to Mr. Tucker Carlson and Mr. Elon Musk. Uh, we love both of you, uh, but there is a small issue that what is showing itself uh, that came out quite clearly in the conversation that Mr. Tucker Carlson you had with the presidential candidate of Argentina, the young guy with the confusing hairstyle. Um, Recently, in the past few years, let's start it from there. In the past few years, Seth MacFarlane came out with a very nice movie which I recommend everybody to see. It's called A Million Ways to Die in the West. Beautiful movie, a comedy as his style is, but everybody should watch it. And his objective in this movie is to demystify or uh, make things much more clear, that to make people believe something closer to reality, by showing them that the West was not, the cowboy lifestyle was not so romantic, because it has through years and propaganda, a lot of common folks have come to the conclusion that, oh, the frontier days was so great, and it has become romanticized, the cowboy lifestyle and the frontier days and all of that, frontier days of the European settlers in North America and South America. All of that has been romanticized as something great and something beautiful and something pure and something lovely. But then Seth MacFarlane sets the record straight, comes up with this comedy that to show you that no, the frontier life and the cowboy lifestyle was shit. Everybody was dying left and right from in one way or another. So A Million Ways to Die in the West is a great movie to watch. Now, I've seen that movie and I heard your views, Mr. Tucker Carlson, with regards to socialism, and it has come to my attention that you, Mr. Tucker Carlson, and apparently Mr. Elon Musk, have come to this conclusion that, have this romantic ideas about capitalism and these scary ideas about socialism, that capitalism is the best and the only way to be, and capitalism, and or maybe even to an extent feudalism, the way things are going, we have moved farther away from capitalism and more towards feudalism as it is. uh, so you have romanticized for yourself and now for your viewers and for your followers, all the idea of capitalism and to an extent feudalism, and the wealthy are right, and the poor should just put up with it. uh, Tough luck, or work harder. And you go all batshit crazy with regards to socialism, and to some degrees understandable. Here is what part of it is understandable: the part that the democratic upper echelon of the Democratic Party, supposedly the party that is supposed to take the side of the worker and the poor and the destitute, they have left that aspect of their party, taking on the taking on the rich for the benefit of the poor. They have left that part of their that side of their party, and they have gone into identity politics and taking part, protecting, a gay rich guy against a straight rich guy. So, Democratic Party, is all about gays and transgender rich's right to do whatever they want against the, conservative rich who, demand certain principles to be implemented in a society to keep the genders, clearly separate and blah 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 blah. That I agree with you. I don't think this whole thing that the Democratic Party have adopted, this platform that the Democratic Party has adopted, that instead of asking for a bit of economic fairness in the society, they're just have adopted identity politics. I guess if you're, a millionaire like Nancy Pelosi and have always been a millionaire, born into a rich family and raised in a rich family, you can't really, pretend, you can't even pretend to be on the side of the workers. So you go on the other direction. You adopt identity politics and you start talking about, other issues, other social issues, except economic issues. So I think Democratic Party has, gone astray, and it's not a good idea to mix, drop all the economic demands of the poor and the destitute for the benefit of a few, to the benefit of a few, rich people who happen to have some, sexual preferences. Anyway, which is different than normal. Anyway, that aside, so I agree with you with regards to social issues, identity politics, and what's wrong with it. But what became clear in your interview with the president of Argentina is that you are also mixing up these identity issues with regards to gender and sexuality. You're mixing up those issues with issues of, economic justice and, socialism, and you're basically trying to say that all socialists are for gays and gay politics and transgenders and this and that and mixed bathrooms and this. And no, you never heard Mr. Bernie Sanders talk a peep. Bernie Sanders, we can say, is the only person in United States politics who has always been a socialist and always sticks to the point of economic justice. You never hear Bernie Sanders talk about, sexuality and gender and this and that, because he knows it's a distraction from the real agenda that the Democratic Party should adapt, and that is basically some kind of economic justice. Here is when I compare your misunderstanding of capitalism and feudalism and your misunderstanding of socialism, and I compare it to the movie with Seth MacFarlane. I can basically come down to one simple question. I can explain it by referring to one simple question that you asked the candidate for presidency of Argentina, whatever his name was, the young guy with the crazy hairstyle. You asked, why is communist buildings, why these buildings built under socialism? By the way, communism and socialism is different. Socialism is admirable, communism is not. Socialism, in my view, and in the view of many, socialism is basically capitalism with a social conscience. You have to be capitalist, okay, fine, but you gotta have some. You have to have some kind of social conscience in order to stay away from shanty towns, in order for your society to not look like India. You see what I'm saying? India has capitalism with no social conscience. You don't want that. But you're headed that way, Mr. Elon Musk. In the rest of the Western society, you're headed that way if you know, go with capitalism with no social conscience. Here's the thing. You ask why buildings built under socialism are so ugly. They're all concrete filled. They're all concrete. Well, for a very obvious reason, which I'm not sure why it has escaped your brilliant mind, Mr. Tucker Carlson. And I'm not making that statement in a sarcastic manner. I think you're an intelligent man, but I'm not sure why it skipped your mind. The reality is, first, concrete, what is you can basically put your finger on it right away. Concrete is durable and low maintenance. And cheap to work with. You pour it, it sets, it hardens, needs very little maintenance, and it lasts, as comparing to the life of a human being, you can say it lasts forever. Very durable, with very low maintenance costs, and easy to build, cheap to build. And that's exactly where you and the, you know, presidential candidate of Argentina put your finger on it, that it's cheap to build. And that's, you know, that's a fault of socialism, that it looks to make things cheap. Well, Mr. Tucker Carlson, the reality is that I also, like you, like those elegantly built colonial buildings all over South America and all over Europe, all over India, and all over, you know, African continents. They are very beautiful, elegantly built colonial style mansions and structures and churches and government buildings built all over the world by the Europeans. But one thing escapes your mind is that the only way those elegant structures, which, as you admitted, were mostly plaster and bricks and plaster and, you know, very delicate stuff with all the nice curves and all the beautiful delicate intricacies applied in their construction. One thing you're forgetting is that the only way that is possible is if labor for production of those buildings is either free or extremely cheap, i.e. next to free. So what I'm trying to say is, you can build the beautiful pyramids only if, comparing to the master, the laborer is living dirt poor. If the laborer is sleeping on the ground and eating bean and rice 3 meals a day and working 12-15 hours a day, yes, you can build the pyramid. Yes, you can build all those colonial style structures in the southern hemisphere by the Europeans. But that's only if the labor is free and or very cheap. And the only way the labor is free or very cheap is if the labor has no standard of living, is living dirt poor on the floor. That's the only way you can build a structure and pay for it, and maybe even make some profit at the end. That's the only way. That if the cost of your labor is next to nothing. What socialism has done, what keeps escaping your mind, is that socialism says, no, we want our workers to have a medium lifestyle. We don't want our workers to be treated to be living in shanty towns. We want to keep some acceptable standard of living for our labor. That means paying labor, okay, good. Which means building delicate, beautiful, intricate structures is no longer economically viable. not building them and not maintaining them. All these plaster and curvy structures, plaster and brick laid structures that you like, many of them are inefficient, many of them require very expensive maintenance for all throughout their functioning life, not very practical, high maintenance, high price to build it, and high price to maintain it. And it only fucking works if the labor is next to free. Labor is next to free only if the labor is living in a fucking shanty town, or living in the slave quarters at the bottom of the plantation with the dogs and the sheep and the cows. That's the only way you can build beautiful, delicate structures, as is right now with human labor. Maybe in the future, with the help of robots, you can go back to building delicate, beautiful, high maintenance structures, just because then again your labor becomes also next to free with the help of the robots, because there's no healthcare and food and anything else that the robots need. So this idea that you keep misleading yourself and misleading your listeners and your watchers, that no, those days were better, those days were great, socialism is not good, they build ugly structures because if you consider that your workers needs to be paid good enough to have a basic standard of living, then it's no longer economically viable to build those expensive structures. Delicate, beautiful, time-consuming skilled craftsmen have to put in a lot of time to build those elegant structures that you and I like. That will not fly. That will not be economically viable if you have to pay that fucking craftsman a lot of money. Because his time, according to the state, his time the time that he spent building your elegant structure, you have to pay him well for his time, because he needs to have a acceptable standard of living and not live in a shanty town. So you keep misleading people that we can have those elegant structures and we can have labor living well. No, you can't. You can have either labor living above poverty line, or you can have very beautiful, delicately made and delicately maintained structures. You can't have it both ways. Or you can have it both ways also, but then your rate of growth will come much down, because once the building is finished delicately, the way you like it and I like it, once that building is finished, if the labor has to be paid well, the profit margins become extremely small for the master. So the master doesn't have that much money left over to continue building. So the economic growth will not be as such as it is in the United States. It has been in the United States, for example, in the past 50 years. One of the reasons that economic growth has been so noticeable in the United States during the past 50 to 100 years, one of the main reasons is that the United States is cheating. The labor is not paying for domestic labor, but is paying for foreign labor under the table. Illegal labor is being imported into the United States, and they're getting paid under table at half the price of the regular domestic labor. The result is a fat bottom line of profit is left for the master, so the master can use that fat bottom line to expand, to grow his business. I built one building this year, and because I used illegal immigrant labor, which I don't have to insure, and I don't have to pay for healthcare, and I don't have to pay for workers insurance and unemployment insurance and this insurance and that insurance and the other. I don't have to do any of that. with the imported illegal labor, so my profit margins goes up. So next year I build 5 houses, and then my profit margin stays up so much higher. Then the year after that I will build 10 houses, because you're taking money from the domestic labor, putting a little bit of it in the foreign laborers, and a lot of it into the masters, the wealthy's pocket in the United States, so they can use that leftover money that they didn't pay to the domestic worker. They can use that extra profit to growth, to increase. Therefore, you have this noticeable growth rate in the United States because of the cheating that is involved with importing of, you know, importing of illegal labor, which you don't have to pay as much as you pay to the domestic labor. If you do have to pay only domestic wages, the acceptable legal domestic wages, the wages to the only if you can only hire domestic labor in the United States, the growth will fall. The economic growth rate will fall, because the owners, the masters, the wealthy, their bottom line is not going to be that thick, so they cannot grow as fast as they have been growing for the past 100 years. This shining city on the hill is only possible if the labor is paid next to nothing. It's an imported illegal labor which the bosses can pay a quarter of the price of the domestic labor, or a third of the price of the domestic labor. Again, going back to those delicate buildings with the can be built only if the labor is, you pay for labor next to nothing, or it's slave labor. You guys keep going on about this bullshit. No, Mr. Tucker Carlson, you have a very romantic view of, a very romantic view of capitalism and feudalism, and you keep boo-booing socialism. Here's the thing, Mr. Tucker Carlson, you need a trip to India. Your next trip, I suggest, please go take a trip to India, then take a trip to Bangladesh, then go to Pakistan. These countries will show you the result of, first of all, democracy, because these countries have, as a result of the fucking British, these countries, all of them, have 100 years history of democracy and also capitalism. Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, as the result of the fucking 200 years of British colonialism, the fucking British left the legacy of democracy and capitalism for the Indian subcontinent. Go see all three of these countries, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. One is worse than the other with regards to how badly the labor is paid, how big the shanty towns are, and how beautiful and delicate and elegant those structures, old structures, and even new structures that me and you both like, how beautiful and delicate they are, and how well they're maintained. They're shining because the fucking labor is living in shit. No, Tucker Carlson, if you agree that the labor should not live in shit, then in order for the building to be profitable and the labor not live in shit, you have to go to the easy and cheap way, and that is pouring concrete. Yes, it's going to be somewhat ugly, but at least your labor is not living on the ground and eating next to the pigs. one more thing I need to add. Many of you have said this, and every time I hear it, I get pissed off because again, we have a saying in my shithole language that the language of the shithole I come from. We have a saying. We say you go to the judge on your own. You don't take the other side to the court. You go to the judge on your own and you state your case, and the other side is ignored totally. That's the whole go back to the fairness doctrine. If you don't go to the fairness doctrine and both sides are not heard, if you don't apply the fairness doctrine and both sides are not heard, you're going to the judge by yourself. And of course the judge, if is a simpleton, is if he can't reason with you himself as the leader of Argentina, the potential leader of the candidate for leadership of Argentina, he was also on your side. So you have two people on one side going to the judge, which in this case is the public, the average Joe, who doesn't have much information. The two of you go to the average Joe in front of the camera and state your case, and nobody's there to state the other side of the case. That's a problem. What I hear that every time pisses me off about how many people have socialist systems. I guess you bunch all of them up, socialist and socialist and communist. You bunch them all up. You say it's the same thing, which is not. Socialism, as I said, is capitalism, is a social conscience. Communism is a totally different thing. Communism, under socialism, you do have private ownership. You just have to pay a little more for it in taxes and whatever. Under communism, you can't have private ownership. So they're two different things. You know it too, but I guess you prefer to ignore it. But what I hear that pisses me off every time is you keep saying that so many socialist leaders, socialist system killed so many people, and that's the problem. And the presidential candidate of Argentina went along with you. He was even increasing the fire under this statement and saying, yes, they are all killers and murderers and socialism is all about violence and this, and yes, it's all shit. Well, not really. Socialism, in reality, socialism, and for that matter, communism, are very new ideas, 20th century ideas. 20th century was communism, and socialism, late 20th century ideas. Most of the Scandinavian states are socialist. Very late, they came very late to the game. So from the beginning of the time, all these billions of people who were killed in wars, they weren't killed in socialism or communism. They were killed through the actions of a bunch of feudals, kings, and lords. And then during World War I, World War II, they were killed by a bunch of, capitalists. The reason behind World War I and World War II was the capitalists in the British capitalists and the German capitalists couldn't get along. The British capitalists, wanted more. Wanted to prevent the German capitalists from taking over the Europe. Capitalist/industrialists. Most of the wars in your planet and most of the killing in your planet was done by the hands of the feudalists and the capitalists. By the hands of the rich. What the fuck are you people talking about? The British ruled Indian subcontinent for 200 years, and during that time they killed 150 million people. Or you can say 150 million were killed through their actions or misactions. And the British never, ever in their fucking history have ever claimed to be socialist or communist. They were always a fucking monarchy and lordship. They still have a fucking House of Lords. The British have killed just 150 million in Indian subcontinent. The British have killed twice as many in Africa, all of the colonies that they've had in Africa. What? And they never were socialists or communists. What the fuck are you people talking about? That socialism has killed so many of the most number of people, and Hitler. Oh fuck! The name of the Nazi party was socialist, but they was working for the fucking industrialists, German industrialists. The British didn't even have that kind of a veil. They were fighting for the Lord. The British Army military force was fighting World War II, World War I, and all of the other wars, conquests that they had around the world. They were fighting it for the House of Lords. House of Lords. What the fuck are you talking about? British have killed by themselves. I have a feeling British all throughout their history, recent history, we're talking about last 500 years, I'm pretty sure the British have killed close to 1 billion people. The most number of people from the most diverse races in the world. And they were all fighting for the House of Lords in Britain. And, you know, the banks that the House of Lords control. So I'm not sure what the fuck are you people talking about, going on and on about Hitler and Stalin, and these were all socialists, and capitalism and feudalism is all nothing but honey? Sweet as honey. What the fuck are you talking about? All through their colonial history, the French were a kingdom, were monarchy. You can't be a socialist and be a monarchy at the same time, or else you're going to look like Sweden and Norway. They have a monarchy, but by name only. So what the fuck are you people talking about? All the wars that were carried out, all the colonial wars that were carried out throughout the planet by the European, none of it was conducted under the banner of socialism. Except the last one, and that was within the European continent itself, which was also false. As I said, the socialists in Germany only carried the banner, but they were actually fighting on behalf of the industrialists. Just like the Ukrainians are, carrying the Ukrainian banner or Ukrainian flag, and some of them are still calling themselves Nazis. Nationalist Socialist Party Nazis, but they're actually fighting on behalf of BlackRock and Goldman Sachs. This is what I'm talking about. It's like current history. It's current event. It's not even past history. Current event is that Ukrainian poor bastards in Ukraine are fighting on behalf of Goldman Sachs and BlackRock and City of London. They're not socialist. Just as much as the Nazi party in Ukraine is socialist, now is exactly as much as the Nazi party in Germany was then, which is basically none. They're fighting on behalf of a bunch of capitalists. What the fuck are you people talking about? No, folks, Mr. Tucker Carlson, you're wrong. People who listen to Mr. Tucker Carlson, I'm kind of sure maybe even Mr. Tucker Carlson doesn't realize how wrong he is. Maybe he's being truthful in his ignorance. But he's being truthful, but he's ignorant of the fact that you're not looking at the whole history. That billions and billions and billions of people who were killed through famine and war throughout history were killed under different forms of capitalism, different forms of feudalism, different monarchies, and different empires. Socialism is a relatively very new concept, and a few countries which are truly socialist, and they've actually, put a lot of money towards educating their public about people's social responsibilities. To be a socialist, you first have to have a very educated public. You can't be a socialist with a bunch of pigs. You just can't. You can't have socialism in a pig farm. You see what I'm saying? But you can have socialism. Imagine a small town where only a bunch of, PhD, higher educated people live in a very small. Imagine a small village which all its members have PhDs in something or other, have master's degree in something or other. That small town, which every member has a very good education, that small town can run in a socialist manner. But you can't run a pig farm in a socialist manner because pigs don't have a social conscience. But educated people have a social conscience. So if the socialism doesn't work, it means because your people weren't educated. They actually don't have a social conscience themselves. So because individually they don't have a social conscience, collectively, if you try to force them to have a social conscience, it will not work out. No, Mr. Tucker Carlson. The most number of people were killed in the history of your planet. The most number of people were killed disproportionately. The most number of people were killed under different empires and monarchies and lordships and feudalist system and different forms of capitalist system, as it is right now in Ukraine, as it was in Iraq. Iraqi war was a bunch of capitalists attacking some villages in the fucking Middle East, some backwards in the people in the Middle East. That's the case was the war with Afghanistan, that was the case with war with Iraq, that was the bombing of Libya. That's a bunch of capitalists, Libya, a bunch of capitalists connected to arms manufacturers and oil companies started bombing an oil producing nation such as Libya to put them in their place so the Western oil companies can go in and go to the source, so they don't have to actually pay the Libyans for their oil or their refined oil. They go to they can have access, become the owners of the oil. But just like Western oil companies now have total access to the source of the oil in Iraq. They don't have to deal with the Iraqi government or Saddam or anybody else. They have just sat on the top of the fucking oil wells in Iraq, the Western oil companies, and pulled the oil out themselves. That is capitalism. What part of this fucking war in the Middle East was socialist or socialist related? What part of war in Ukraine is socialist or socialist related? What are you talking about? The biggest provider of hardware to German army during the war in World War II were Volkswagen, Mercedes, Porsche. These were the biggest provider of hardware to the war effort of Germany. Which part of these companies these companies didn't have a socialist bone in their body? What the fuck are you people talking about? They were protecting the capitalist Germans, the industrialist capitalist Germans against the industrial capitalist British and Americans. The biggest backers of war, even the wars that you keep claiming that the socialists were responsible for those wars, but the backers are capitalists and industrialists. What the fuck are you talking about? They may carry a fucking banner of socialism up front, but behind the guy who's bringing food and water to the war and hardware to the war are capitalists. They're doing to protect their profits, future profits. No, Mr. Elon Musk. No. Socialism, if done right, that is first step in socialism is educating your public very well in order to educated people usually end up with a good amount of social conscience, and then collective social conscience and individual social conscience produces a collective social conscience, and then yes, you will have ugly buildings that are built cheap because you don't want your workers to live in shanty towns, and I'm sorry for that, but everything has a price. Do you want half of your society to live in shanty towns so you can have elegant buildings? Go right ahead. But a lot of people don't think it's worth it because they have a conscience.